The Sony A7S III and the Sony FX3. You've probably heard from lots of people that the FX3 is basically an A7S III just rehoused in a different body. But there is a lot of different features between these two cameras. My name is Chris Broadcast and I am a guest host here on Gear Focus today, and we're going to be covering what the differences are between the Sony FX3 and the Sony A7S III. Now in no particular order, we'll start with the big one, the obvious one, the fact that this looks like a cinema camera. And what I mean by that is it has the same outer body design and color finish to it that the FX6 does, which is actually a cinema camera. Now, when it comes to a video camera, there is the potential that you're gonna be recording video for longer periods of time. Now, although there really isn't any issues with the Sony A7S III when it comes to overheating and recording for long periods of time, Sony has pretty much combated any potential issues with the FX3 by making it a bit chunkier. And that chunk allows for a fan to be built into the camera. That fan really eliminates any potential issues with overheating ever happening. And if you're worried about that fan making noise in your video, you can actually turn that off. So when you are recording video, it will not run the fan. Of course, you can just leave it on all the time, which is what I tend to do because you won't be able to hear it anyway. Another design change, aside from the obvious ones, which we'll talk about in a second, is the placement of the D-pad. It's placed on the back on the A7S III right here. On the FX3, it's now moved to the top. And that makes a lot of sense because the grip on the FX3 is actually a little bit deeper, a little bit sharper, more triangular, and there's a little indentation right on the side just there. And it kind of makes you hold the camera just like this. And when you hold it like that, you realize that the reason that D-pad is now on the top there is so you can quickly access everything with these fingers nice and easily. So placement on the top there makes more sense when it comes to shooting video and being able to quickly change things on the fly. Tally lights. Now you may not know what that means, but basically they're big red LED lights placed on different parts of the camera body. When you're recording, they turn on. So you can see from a distance, from any angle, on the top, from the front, from the side, that the camera is in fact recording. That's really useful for if you're in a multi-camera setup and the camera's not right next to you, you're running a couple of cameras as a one-man show, there's one over there, there's one over there. You can see from a distance that both cameras are recording. On the A7S III, we don't have that feature. We only have this red box which goes around the outside of the LCD when you are recording, which means you can basically only see if you're recording if you're looking at the back of the LCD. So tally lights are a really useful video feature on the FX3. On the top of the FX3, you actually have 3 video dedicated buttons, which are your iris, your ISO, and your white balance. Now the white balance does exactly what you expect it to do. When you hit it, you're able to change your white balance. The iris and the ISO are a little bit different in that they don't actually let you change those functions, they actually lock them. So to stop you accidentally changing your iris, which is the fancy cinema name for your aperture, or your ISO, you push those buttons, it stops you from being able to change it. The only way you can change it is if you push it again, and then it unlocks it and you can go in and change it. On the back of the FX3 as well, where you have your D-pad on the A7S III, you actually have more dedicated buttons on the dial there, which you didn't have on the A7S III. You have your peaking, your shutter, your zebras, and your display button. The shutter button on the bottom there works exactly the same way as the iris and the ISO does. When you push that, it doesn't allow you to change the shutter. It either locks or unlocks it and stops you from accidentally changing on the fly. The shutter one here is probably the more important of all the three because 180-degree rule, when you're shooting video, you want to abide by that. 180-degree rule is obviously keeping your shutter speed at double what your frame rate is. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you want to make sure you can get as close as you can to that, which is 1/50th. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you want to have a shutter speed of 1/120th. The on-off dial on the A7S III is where you'd expect it to be, right on the top here. On the FX3, that is actually a zoom rocker. Your on-off switch is right on the back. Now this is actually really useful because if you're using a Sony power zoom lens, it allows you to zoom in and out of that power zoom lens. If you don't have a power zoom lens, you can actually change this so that it will work with clear image zoom, which means you can be using any lens you want and get a little bit extra reach with no loss of quality. Another little subtle but nice difference on here is the size of the recording button. A little tiny record button on the A7S III, but on the FX3 you have a nice big round record button, which actually is a tally light as well. If you put these cameras side by side, there's a big one that's missing, the EVF. It's just pretty much been chopped straight off the top of the FX3 here. The benefit of having that gone means that this is actually a little bit lighter. The center of gravity is a little bit lower, so it's much easier to balance on a gimbal, and you can use that additional weight savings for accessories if you needed to, or bigger lens, anything like that. And then part of the reason the FX3 actually costs more money than the A7S III is the included top handle that you get with it. There's 2 XLR inputs, there's a 3.5mm input, all completely controllable on that top handle, which does in fact screw directly into these 2 1/4" 20 mounts on top of the FX3, which means it can't accidentally come out. You can use the top handle as a handle, just a really useful feature. And that equivalent handle to buy on its own, if you wanted to use it with like the A7S III, would cost more than buying the FX3 did when you get the top handle included with it anyway. So it's kind of a better deal than buying the A7S III and an XLR audio handle yourself. So that is the major differences between the Sony FX3 and the Sony A7S III, and hopefully that will help you decide which one you ultimately end up wanting to buy. Once again, my name is Chris Brockhurst, and I have a self-titled YouTube channel, which will be linked down below. I'm a Sony user with lots of camera tips and videos like this. I shoot weddings, I shoot a lot of real estate. Thank you for watching today, and thank you to Gear Focus for allowing me to be a guest on your channel. Take care, guys. Bye.